These are 2 advent calendars I just completed for my sons Dylan and Jared. The design for these come mainly from a combination of ideas I got by researching advent calendars on the web. The construction for these, however, is based entirely on Mark Spagnolo's construction method, which he details on his channel, The Wood Whisperer. I have to thank Mark for those videos because it gave me a lot of ideas on how to construct these, including a few additional ideas which I incorporated into these. The door mechanism is essentially the same as the Wood Whisperer Advent Calendar and is constructed using fast cap blind nails. I added a decorative compartment at the top where I added a name which I cut out on the scroll saw, and also added some battery operated LED lights which I got from Walmart. The rest of the calendar was decorated with decorations which can be purchased at Michael's. I began by cutting some Baltic birch material to the correct lengths, but leaving the width cut until later after all the dados had been cut. I used my adjustable width sled to cut all the dados. I made a sliding box joint jig to cut repeatable dados as demonstrated on the Wood Whisperer video. I probably should have made it longer, but I just clamped an additional support piece on the end for the longer pieces. Once I had the sled set up, I cut all the ends. Next, I moved the sliding jig over by exactly 3 inches and cut the remaining dados for the compartments. After all the dados had been cut, I trimmed all the pieces to the correct width. I followed this by cutting the rabbet on the fronts of all the cross pieces for the doors. The cross pieces needed a little extra finessing as the plywood was not exactly half-inch thick and the remaining joint was a little oversized. I used 1/4 inch MDF for the compartment dividers. I had also planned to use MDF for the doors as I did not have any 1/4 inch Baltic birch. I used fast cap blind nails as Mark had suggested for the hinges, and I found the cheapest place to get these was MacLeod's. They only charge $1 for shipping, and a packet of 100 nails with shipping works out to less than $4. I also purchased the insertion tool with some nails, as it was cheaper to purchase it as a combo pack, although there were not enough nails in that to complete my 2 projects, so I had to purchase additional nails as well. I also figured out that it helps to put a round over on the back of the door to help it swing freely in the frame. The most tedious part of the project was laying out the position for the door hinge holes. I used the blind nail insertion tool as suggested by Mark to help mark the positions, but I just drilled the holes freehand, and I drilled the hole right through the material. I figured I was going to paint this project and the paint would fill the small hole. It later turned out to be a blessing in disguise that I had decided to drill the holes right through, as I had to redo all the doors. I put a first coat of primer and paint on the doors before assembling the calendar, as I did not want to get paint stuck behind the door or on the hinges. It is probably a good idea to try paint as much as you can before assembling if you are looking for a perfect finish. Lastly, I just assembled the calendar in layers, and once I had all the layers glued up, I glued the sides as the final step. Once glued up, I did some final sanding to ensure everything was perfect for painting. For the pitch of the roof, I just eyeballed it until it was at a pitch I liked, and I notched out some assembly points freehand on the bandsaw. The length was still a little too long, and I later trimmed these back by just deciding what looked best. I used a 5mm thick piece of Luan for the back. As final preparation for painting, I filled all my imprecise joints with some water putty and did some last minute sanding. I also masked off the backs of all the doors, and this actually caused the first of my problems. The additional thickness on the doors put stress on the weak MDF at the hinge, and repeatedly opening and closing of the doors during painting caused some of the MDF doors to fail at the hinge. In the end, I had to pull off all the doors and remake them. When remaking them, I used 1/4 inch Baltic birch. I managed to get a sheet large enough for all the doors from Michael's, and with a 50% discount voucher paid less than $3. I probably should have done that from the start, and sometimes it just does not pay to be thrifty. I cut all the new doors, but had to come up with a solution to attach them, since the frame had already been glued. The solution I came up with was to use a blind nail for the bottom hinge and use a short pin nail dropped in from the top of the top hinge. This is where previously drilling the holes right through the material actually turned out to be a good thing, as I had a hole to drop the pin nail through from the top. I pre-drilled all the hinge holes on the doors using a 1/16 inch drill bit. This is smaller than required for the blind nails, but I would later drill those larger by hand when installing the new doors. For cutting the door handles, I came up with a simple jig. I just decided how long the handle should be and then marked that length out on a piece of scrap wood. I then drilled a 1/4 inch hole for the dowel and cut a thin curve through the scrap block. The dowel can then be inserted and cut repeatedly by lining up the end of the dowel to the end of the scrap block. I painted half the handles red and half green. As a decorative element, I cut each of my son's names on a piece of scrap pine. I cut a thin rabbit at the bottom and then lined up the bottom of a printout of their name along the edge of the rabbit. The name was then cut out on the scroll saw, and I did some final shaping and sanding by hand. Here you can see how I attach the new doors. I begin by enlarging the pre-drilled hinge hole on the bottom of the door. I just let the existing pre-drilled hole guide the drill freehand. I then insert the door using a blind nail on the bottom and drop in a pin nail from the top. I cut the point of the nail off as I did not want it to penetrate the door, since I secured the nail in place by depressing the head of the nail into the existing hole and needed the door to swing freely on the nail. For the gable ends, I cut some very thin strips off some scrap boards on the table saw and painted them white. These were then trimmed to size and glued on. For the numbers, I used a stencil and a gold and silver Sharpie. The rows were alternated 1 row silver, 1 row gold. My wife and I then spent some time together decorating the rest of the calendar. We used a bunch of decorative elements that we purchased from Michael's. I also purchased a couple of battery-operated LED lights from Walmart, and these were threaded into the compartment behind the names. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and got some ideas for your own advent calendar. If you want to see more of my projects, then subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my website for more information on this and other projects I'm working on. As always, thanks for watching.